Hey everyone, welcome to the Security Revenue Live Show. Thanks for joining us live. I see we got some folks joining on in. We'll get started here in just a second. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. My name is Taylor Wells. I am the host and also the founder of the Cyber GTM Alliance. And this is our live webinar series. Today, I have an awesome topic and panelists joining. We're going to be talking about all about channel partnerships, leveraging MSPs, partnerships in general. And this is a really interesting topic, not only in the world of cybersecurity because of how prevalent indirect channels are, but also my own personal experience because I started an MSP. And so I remember the days of working with channel partners. And but then also excited to hear from our MSP partnership leaders. So let's jump right in. Let's do some introductions. Jabari, you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah. Hey, good to be here. And Taylor, thanks for having me. So I'm Jabari Norton. I lead global partnerships at Edge Delta. I've been in and around the cybersecurity space for about 25, almost 30 years. And, really excited to talk about this topic. Done it across, I think, now 7 early stage cyber companies. So a lot of experience, and things have changed over the years. Partners are more important than ever today. So excited about this topic.
Thanks, Jabari. Appreciate it. Aaron, you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Aaron Petterick. I'm currently running our MSP program at Zero Networks, which is a network security solution to basically segment your network and automate least privilege access for you. And so I've been in the channel space for about 6 years, worked with thousands of MSPs, worked with well over 100 vendors during those 6 years. So excited to here for the conversation today.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, again, for joining us live. I see some folks still joining on in. If you have questions for us or the panel, we love live questions. Give us your hardest questions. No, just joking. Give us, whatever you have, throw it in the chat. We love to try to answer it live and go on any rabbit trail you'd all like the panel to go on. So cool. Let's jump right into the agenda. For those that are joining us live, you can click on the little chat icon in the middle. Throw your questions there. We'll be monitoring that. And then for those that can't attend the entire event, we will be recording this and set up the recording later if you want to review or share with your team. So let's jump right into the first question here. Let's start with partnership strategy. And Jabari, I think you already mentioned things have changed. And I'm curious, what have you all noticed as you've all been quote unquote veterans in the space? What have you all noticed has changed over in the past couple of years? And Jabari, I'll start with you since you kind of queued me up on that one.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, partnership strategy and kind of how you engage has really changed over time, and really, partners now play, an even more important role and kind of critical role, especially as companies are trying to really kind of sift through the noise with so many different types of solutions now with the explosion of AI. Companies, CISOs, organizations just have a tough time to kind of wade through all of that. And so really leveraging, partners to really both kind of break through that noise and really bring best of breed solutions around that. And, for us, we're partner first companies, whether that's an MSP, MSSP, MDR, or even our channel partners. Those are really, really crucial for us, not only to the access that they have, but really just as a mechanism to scale, because the game has changed, right? Financial markets have tightened up and other types of things. You really need a way to really scale in addition to your direct sales force. So those are some of the bigger shifts that we've seen. We're going to see more shifts as we move into AI to see what partners play and what new partners will jump into the space. As cyber is just a hard problem to solve, AI will help us solve some of these problems faster and more efficiently. But those are some of the changes that we see, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through some of the content.
Thanks, Jabari. I love it. Yeah, it sounds like obviously to scale organizations, it sounds like it's almost a requirement to have either a channel or partnership, a well-developed partnership program, especially in the channel space, and then in cybersecurity. And then we'll also sound like some AI and other topics, which we'll definitely cover, like you mentioned. Aaron, I'd love for you to kind of share, what have you seen, notice what's changed in the market, and even piggyback on what Jabari says, what are some things that maybe the requirements for the market or things you're seeing of like, okay, we have to do it this way, or it's really important to have the channel in place because of these reasons. Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything that's been said, right? The channel is the centerpiece of our go-to-market here at Zero Networks, and certainly a lot of other vendors in the space. Simply put, you just can't reach effectively the mid-market and the SMB types of customers without these strong channel partnerships. It's just really there are too many of them, and it's just really hard to reach those, in an organization. And so you really need to leverage the channel. And so, what's shifted, at least from my view, is partners don't just want another vendor. There are, I think the latest count I saw, there's like 6,500 vendors in the ecosystem now. And so being one of those vendors and trying to stand out and, trying to reach all the MSPs is really, really difficult. On the flip side of that, being an MSP is almost harder than ever because you have all these vendors, reaching out to you on a regular basis. So, which ones which call do you take? Which calls do you not take? That becomes really, really hard. And so they don't want just another vendor. I think they want solutions they can wrap into their stack and lead with for their customers. And so, as Zero, our strategy has really evolved from signing more partners up to, really focus on deepening the relationships with those right partners.
Thanks for sharing. Well, there's definitely a couple things I'd love to dig on, especially like how to go deeper or how to actually enable the right partnerships. It looks like we actually got our first question in the chat. Mick asked, I'd appreciate your thoughts regarding how MSPs and MSSPs are tackling the challenges of quantum computing and how this will impact existing cybersecurity strategies and service providers and the services solution. Any thoughts on that question for Mick as far as sounds like the evolution of obviously computing, yeah, I think that's obviously a more specific product related question. But any thoughts, Jabari or Aaron, on that question? Do you understand it correctly?
Yeah, I think the question was around like kind of what trends or things people are seeing kind of specific to quantum computing. Is that about
I think so.
right?
Yep, and how that'll affect cybersecurity, MSPs, et cetera, the ecosystem.
I'm not an expert on the quantum computing side, and I really haven't had a lot of kind of questions in that area. So I don't know. I do say is, or at least some of the trends and things that I've seen, over time with, as MSSPs or MSPs have access to more compute horsepower, they're able to kind of analyze, process that data in just ways that were not possible kind of before. And so I can't speak to quantum specific, but like if you think of like cloud computing, right? As a lot of the providers moved from, they were standing up stacks in their own data centers or environments, as they moved to cloud environments, they were able to process data faster, and that's where a lot of these MDR, XDR providers have really kind of gone through, is where they're able to really triage kind of things that, tier one analysts and stuff would have to kind of deal with on a day by day basis. And now they're able to use, cloud computing to go ahead and do that. So as we kind of think of deeper or advances from a computing standpoint, even from an AI standpoint, it's just going to make these providers more efficient. So being able to, kind of serve their customers better with kind of a lower cost, so higher margins, to go ahead and do that and really help them tackle probably more meaningful problems versus the kind of the mundane things that, whether that's AI chatbots or assistants, can actually go ahead and do that versus leaving the really hard reasoning for humans. So I don't know if that answers the question
Yeah, thanks.
directly, but probably directionally in that area.
Aaron, any thoughts on the question? I know it's kind of a separate from the agenda, but any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also don't have a ton of experience when it comes to quantum computing. I think when it comes to the use of AI technology, AI is making everything go faster, and so having a good sort of system in place on how you're. So I think this is from an MSP perspective, right?
Yep.
And so, how you're analyzing your stack, how you're making decisions on what vendors to use. I think, AI is definitely helping with that to a degree. And so it's a challenge for sure. Well, this is all sort of like new, to a lot of us.
Yeah.
But, leveraging AI to automate, sort of like the back house things is really where I've seen the benefit of AI today. And so I'm seeing a lot of MSPs do it that way, as far as, trying to answer tickets more faster, things like that. How this actually bakes into their stack, I think is still an open topic. I think that still needs to, be figured out. But, hopefully we'll see that over the next couple of years, and we'll see more and more MSPs leveraging AI when it comes to standardized stacks and things like that. hopefully from a selling perspective as well.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think I think the question from Mick was obviously pretty technical and focused on quantum computing and just the evolution of even AI and technology. And that's a great question. I think in general, I think from what I'm hearing, especially from security leaders, right, and from the community in general, is that they are unsure of how a lot of this stuff is going to play out. Number one, and I've noticed even actually, Jabari, we're at a dinner last week in the Bay Area for the Alliance, and I was talking to another go-to-market leader there, and he was sharing how a lot of the CISOs and security leaders and folks that he sells to and interacts with have basically cut their kind of long-term planning in half. So usually they would be like, 6, 12 months out planning strategically and even beyond that. Now they're looking at like 3 to 6 months because technology is evolving so fast. So, I mean, from my perspective, not being a technical expert in cyber, it does look like people are obviously looking at like, hey, things are changing so fast, it's hard to actually plan long term. Obviously, making me have more, specifics around quantum computing. Which, happy to happy to reach out to our community. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we can try to connect you with somebody that's an expert in that area. But in general, things are evolving fast, even on the go-to-market side, right? Which even Aaron mentioned as far as how do we interact. Maybe Jabari, you mentioned a little bit too, how we interact with customers, partners. AI is definitely a part of that, and changing, kind of rapidly how we do things and scale things, and exciting stuff. I think in general, how we can serve people more and serve them better and beyond that. So I love both of you mentioned kind of, partnering with the right folks. It's really important, kind of in summary, that we partner in general, have a partnership program to scale. I'm curious, is there a certain size company, or just maybe it's just that type of company that you all can analyze of like, hey, this is a high growth company, they want to scale. I'm curious from either of you on that point, what is a good fit when it comes to like, hey, we need to bring in either one of you to come in and build out a partnership program, an MSP specifically, or partnership program in general. What type of company is that? Because honestly, I've worked with some early stage technology companies, and maybe they're bootstrapped or lightly funded, and partnership program fell apart, right? And they had a horrible experience building it, and actually the direct channel worked for them, relatively speaking. So I'm just curious, maybe I'll start with you, Aaron. When is it a good fit, and when is it really important? Is it like, hey, we're either looking to scale, or we have, we've recent funding round? What are some signals you see for when it's time to start building out your MSP program?
Yeah, I mean, the types of MSPs that I've seen that are really strong and continue growth over, year over year, they really, to me, they sort of share two qualities. One, they're heavily focused on growth, right? They're in acquisition mode. They are looking to grow. They're looking to learn. They're attending events, always, trying to, educate themselves and figure out what the next thing is, right? So they're very heavily focused on growth, both from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective on just learning what's out there. But they're also very intentional about security. Trusted advisors, like MSPs are, you can't just check compliance boxes anymore, right? Compliance frameworks like the CIS framework, NIST frameworks, HIPAA, PCI, etc. Those are really establishing a baseline for MSPs to follow, and hopefully most MSPs are following those, or at least leveraging those in their day-to-day decisions. Attackers aren't reading compliance manuals, right? They're looking for gaps. So, uh, clients of MSPs are hiring them because they're their trusted advisor, right? Clients want, at the end of the day, they want them to protect their family business that's been around for 100 years, right? Protect their reputation, and their revenue. And so that's what MSPs are hired for. And so hopefully, going back to my, that intentional about security, they're not just doing the bare minimum, they're actually going above and beyond that. And that's from both from a security standpoint, but from a support and partnership standpoint as well. And so at Zero, we are very heavily focused on that. And so we enable them through, lots of hands-on training for both their sales teams and their engineers, right? Those are different conversations as far as, an AE is having versus a technical engineer. We're always providing content that they can white label. That's really important in the channel, is having resources and materials that don't come from the vendor, but you're really empowering that MSP, to sound like the expert at the table when they're having that conversation with the customers. And so, what I've found is that when the MSPs feel invested, enablement actually sticks.
Very cool. Jabari, any
Yeah,
thoughts
Taylor,
on
I
that?
I mean, I would really agree with what Aaron said. I mean, I think really the word intentional, I think is really important as far as that. And so kind of adding to that, from a MSP and MSSP or MDR, any of the providers that are out there, what I've also found is that kind of, tying on the intentional is that they know their market extremely well. Like they know who they're going after. They know who their ICP is. They have a very specific either set of verticals or set of solutions that they are just going to go and dominate. So it could be a small, medium-sized banks, and the Midwest, or it could be, retailers, et cetera. And so they're also intentional about what they do extremely well, and they don't try and go too broad. I've also found that, and I think Aaron kind of touched on this, is they tend to be pretty tech forward. So kind of the best and the top MSSPs are kind of, trying to re-evolve themselves or looking into new technology. They are cautious though of adding new things to their stack, right? Because it's, once it's in their stack, it's going to touch every single one of their customers, kind of could impact in a positive or negative way their brand, things like that. So they're intentional of how they go through that. And, they're, guarded and, really, measure multiple times before they put the new things in their stack. But they are looking at how can they add technology and or services to deliver higher value to their clients. So they're not just kind of like, hey, we're going to milk this thing for a while, et cetera. They're always looking at being on the cutting edge because a lot of times their customers are kind of pushing them there. So I do think that word intentional that Aaron used is a good one. And it's got a couple different angles around that.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I love it. And I see more folks have joined us live. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Happy to try to answer them throughout our discussion here. I'd love to go a little bit deeper, or maybe kind of the next phase. You've identified either the MSP is intentional. They're obviously have a good foundation, and they're either have a specific market they're experts in, or they're differentiated in some way. I'm curious, how do you then enable that partner? What is maybe from co-selling, co-marketing, all the different routes? I heard a lot about obviously making sure the product integrates with their stack, making sure they're forward thinking and they're security minded. I heard a bunch of really cool stuff there from kind of identifying what MSPs or channel partners would make sense. From there, what's that next step? How do you enable them to, and that's obviously a bunch of different, bunch of thoughts there, but I love to think about, your process of, is it, hey, we start with co-marketing, maybe we do some co-marketing first, or if they're a large MSP, I'm sure it depends on the size of MSP, the size of partner, you may different routes, but I'm just curious, what's that next step after you've identified a good partner? I'll start with you, Jabari.
Yeah. And this one, in my approach, and at least what I've seen kind of, do well in my experience is not trying to have them sell something new. So that's hard for a lot of technology companies as they go in and have these conversations with MSPs is like, okay, let's figure out how to enable you to sell our thing or to enable that or drive that. And what I've found is that's a really hard path because that's a whole new motion that their sales teams, their marketing teams, and kind of their entire company have to kind of get behind. And what I've kind of found as a way to really accelerate growth and what they can do is actually understand their existing products, who their ICP is, what are they selling, and then how our products or solution kind of tap into that. So it's already on the boat, right? So the boat's already going down and it's sailing. How do we just put more wind behind that? So really just embedding it into ideally an existing motion. So as an MSP seller, they don't have to sell anything different than what they're selling today. It's just now, our solution comes along with it as part of that offering or as an additive piece to what they're doing. So I find that, kind of an enablement through understanding kind of their products and solution is the best path because then it makes it really easy. And we can change our vernacular and language to kind of tie into that. And then we're also speaking that same language that they're used to.
That's super cool. Aaron, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that's yeah, I think what he hit on is super important. The things that I would add to it is, I think, I think we've all been sales reps, at some point in our careers, if we're not already today. And, to me, it's a matter of, what's going to help and, help get those conversations. And, two things to me that move that needle is education and proof points, right? Webinars where we co-present with an MSP, that almost always drives pipeline for us, right? Where we can hop on a webinar that we're having with their customer base to educate them on cybersecurity, to highlight the latest breach that might have happened in their area, or in their space that they work in. So finding sort of common points there. The other is packaging customer wins into like social media posts or one pagers, or little videos that the partner can run with and put on their social media page. We highlight it on our social media page, things like that. So, MSPs are always looking for new logos, right? Just like the vendor community is. And so, publicly lifting them up and highlighting, what they're really good at, highlighting our partnership really helps, show others, how to be successful. What is that competitor across the street doing that I'm not doing, right? Doing those kinds of things, partnering in those ways with MSPs builds credibility. And ultimately, when an MSP is trying to decide out of those 6,500 vendors in the space, what vendors and or people, more importantly, that they want to work with, it always comes down to trust. And so, the more that the vendor community can lift the partners up, and the more the partners can lift up the vendor community, that's where partnership really, really, hits its stride.
I love that. Super cool. And I think we're going into kind of the go to market stuff, which I love to talk about and pick both of your brains on, whether it's doing webinars or events, or how do you kind of go to market together, and what are all those what are the effective activities. You reminded me, Aaron, of actually really early in my career, I actually did my first webinars at the MSP I worked at, and we had vendors come in. I was too scared, didn't know what I was talking about, never done a webinar before. And so we actually had, I remember one time, it was my very first webinar, the other host had to kind of jump in because I didn't really know how to like transition this part of the webinar or whatever. Embarrassing, but really cool that we were able to grow and bring in multiple vendors to help us do a lot of our go to markets. And that was a huge part of not only the maturity of our go to market motions, because we had these vendors come in and teach us, support us, help us do these things, but it was also part of our success, right? We were able to not only sell more of their solutions, but then also we were able to get MDF funds, all sorts of cool stuff that was able to help our general go-to-market. So what it sounds like, obviously, in recap, MSP is super important to have, especially if you want to scale your organization. Finding the right MSP, there's things like security alignment, making sure, Jabari, I love what you said about getting deep into understanding their tech stack, their ICP. How do you integrate? Don't try to, I remember hearing, forget who said it, but don't ever, I think it was actually on Shark Tank. One of the investors, one of the sharks said, I love products that you don't have to educate people on the problem that they're already experiencing. There's already obviously a need out there. And so why try to create something new when you can just join what's already happening and make it better and accelerate it? And there's already either a problem people have identified or a solution, you can enhance it. I'd love to kind of transition now into go-to-market strategies and because I think that was something, once again, I experienced at an MSP that was really powerful and super effective. And honestly, like at the MSP, we were like, we had plenty of solutions, plenty of products to sell. Our problem was getting new customers. And every MSP that even like in our community, or every VP of sales or CRO or CEO or any marketing leader at the MSP, especially in our community or people I know, their number one thought is growth, right? They're all trying to hit a number just like everyone else. So I'm curious how, outside of like obviously selling products and making revenue and all that fun stuff, how do you help them get more customers? And I know, Aaron, you kind of hinted on, so maybe I'll start with you, Aaron, since you kind of talked about that. Any other insights, things like, obviously you said webinars, is there any other go-to-market things where you're like, wow, this was a really cool partnership for how we activated a conference or run paid ads together or whatever it is? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting on, one of the biggest challenges in the space, right? Again, how do you stand out? How do you help grow not just your business, but, selling in the channel? You need to make sure you know who your audience is. And, I learned early on in my career that MSPs are not my customers, right? A lot of people, a lot of vendors come into this space wanting to sell through the channel, and they're selling to MSPs. And you certainly need to do that, but a few months into doing that, a light bulb went off for me when I was in that selling role, and quickly realized, oh man, I'm not selling to the MSP. I'm selling through the MSP, which is a very different sales motion. It's a very different talk track. And so, to be successful, you really got to do, several things. One, you got to be consistent, right? So consistency really, really matters, and context matters as well, right? So consistency meaning like, you can't just have regular touch points and, just sort of checking in types of touch points, right? I think we've all probably done that in our sales career. If you've been in sales for long enough, and you've all probably realized, like I did, like that just doesn't work. And so, what I've learned is, true consistency. It's about sharing insights. It's about spotting and highlighting risks, highlighting wins, things that their competitors are doing potentially across the street. Because, again, nobody wants to fall behind their competition, but giving clients something that they can act on, right? That's how you're going to build trust over time. It's not with frequency alone, but with frequency and value, right? And so when you're making those touch points, what value are you offering, right? We all get so much spam these days. And I don't know about you, but I'm sort of just become blind to it a little bit. But those that are reaching out and offering value to me, I'm more likely to click on. I still might not click on it, right? But I'm more likely to click on that because they've done their homework and they're actually offering me insights and something that can potentially help me in my day-to-day life or whatever it is. So that's sort of the approach that we take as Zero Networks with our partners. And if I can make a partner's, account executive, an AE, a CAM, whatever you want to call them, sound sharper on a sales call, if I can make them look good, make them sound super smart, then, I'm going to earn a higher spot in their stack. And so I think we all have partner portals these days. I think every vendor that I know, we all have some kind of a partner portal. At least we claim we do. The challenge there is, PDFs aren't enough anymore. And so, you need to build repeatable motions for onboarding, training, co-selling, things like that. And so something, to sort of get back to your question that we've done outside of webinars, something that I've seen be successful is, training certifications, right? So if you're a vendor in the space and you don't have, like a training platform, definitely highly recommend you do that. But then not just have a course to take, but when they pass that course, what are you doing to sort of boost them up as well? And so what we've done is we have training certification. So if you pass the sales training course, you get a little certificate that you can then post on social media, which is going to help both of your brand awareness. We give them something to include on their email signature that they've achieved this certification and so forth. Again, makes them look like an expert, makes them look good, and again, sort of boost them up a little bit. So those are a couple things.
I love the brand awareness you get from that. I mean, obviously, not only probably the AEs, the sales teams are more enabled because they have more education, and that's obviously ripple effects. But the brand awareness you get on both ends, you get that affinity from the AEs, right? Because they get this recognition, giving them a platform to elevate their status and their career and their position, but then also for the direct market as well with the security professionals or whoever your buyers are. I love that, and I love also obviously the consistency and making sure you're have the systems and all the processes, and then providing value, like you said. I love that too. Like how can every interaction? Because I think especially the cool thing about partnerships is, I mean, really any type of. I think partnerships is a great term for how you should view all relationships, right? Like even with your customers, like how is this a mutually beneficial partnership, and how do we both have a win out of this and create something unique, create value, et cetera. But even with things that are outside of your product, right? And I think go to market, that's actually one thing the reason why I'm actually even doing this panel, the reason why a big part of why I created even the Alliance is to create more opportunities for partners to share insights, to go to market together, more opportunities to build relationships. Because even just in go to market, even outside of the technology, the actual tech, the go to market space, right, is so complex, and there's so much nuance and so much ways that that I've experienced value from vendors that had nothing to do with their product, had everything to do with go to market, right? Back in my experience. But then also it sounds like you can provide value on the technical side, making them either giving them industry insights, giving them opportunities, obviously, to get education through certifications, all super cool stuff. I love all of that. Jabari, any insights on how do you enable folks go to market with partners and really make the most of the partnership? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would agree there. And this is probably the hardest thing. I would say one of the things that I've seen work, you'll have to try this out on a per partner basis and things like that, is kind of smaller local events with the MSPs reps, right? Because, while we're selling through them, I think sometimes, it gets lost that there's the reps on the other side and kind of how do we help them? And so, they, working with those specific reps who are either hungry or want to go ahead and do that. Like they'll have specific targets they're going after. They'll have specific prospects and customers that they have in areas. And so understanding what those proof points are, and then, inviting those customers, prospects, et cetera, to their events and funding those events, right? Helping them fund those events that they can have in their local areas. So it's really all about them. I mean, obviously our technology is coming along and helping to provide the overall solution. And then even, where that can add additional places, tie in, other partners that they have in their stack, right? Because we're not the only partner in their stack. So these are all complementary products to us. So bring them in, or even bring in the cloud provider that they use on the back end. So you could bring in AWS or somebody like that as part of that. And so that are tying into some of these smaller local events. And so it's really, it's kind of like anything else in the channel. It all starts in the field and starts with the reps. It doesn't change with an MSP at all. It just doesn't. And so I think that's where sometimes that's missed. And so by doing that and enabling that, you build trust from those, sellers, and then that kind of resonates up through the org as well.
I love
That's one
that.
of just my approach I've taken in the past.
I love that, Jabari. Yeah, I love that. And I love, even Aaron, you said it earlier too, in regards to, you're not selling to MSPs, you're selling to whoever their customers are. And thinking about it almost simplifies things in some ways, because obviously there's the nuance of the partnership relationship and all that fun stuff. But when you do go to market, it's like, okay, how do we get in front of the folks, how to build relationships, how have we done that from the direct side, how can we do that and make everyone win, obviously. And then I love, Jabari, too, bringing in other partners, and it's really cool. I love to see that. I love to see, like, even when somebody does like a full day event or road show, and they have multiple partners, multiple vendors involved, and then obviously also the MSPs, and it's really cool to see. And I think we could, I had this idea of, like, if we could you reduce your CAC by 50% by leveraging all the partners in the ecosystem, right? Because if you think about it, we're all paying for events, we're all paying for ads, we're all paying for, outbound tools, we're all paying for whatever. And if you could, I had this like dream of, like, if you could actually leverage partnerships well enough, could you just split the cost, right? Could you tap into each other's networks, et cetera? And, I think that's, and I've experienced that too. I've experienced that, like, when I've leveraged a partner, it's like, oh my gosh, the costs go down, to get in front of people, and you have these cool ripple effects of tapping each other's audiences, and there's all sorts of ripple effects that you get from partnerships, which is pretty cool, even just from the go-to-market standpoint, right? Just reducing your cost to get in front of people, reducing your cost to get customers. And it's a huge miss, I think, for MSPs. Like, even if I were to start my career 10 years ago, I was like, hey, how do I even go even deeper with my vendor relationships? Or partnerships in general, right? Because that is an amazing way from, like, the MSP side to reduce your cost acquisition, to reduce, and then potentially more revenue, right? You can resell, you can have an additional revenue channel that you may not already have had. And super cool there. I do have a cool question that came in the chat. Diane asked, what about master agents like Avant, Intellius, and Teleris? Do you all see them have their fair share of selling security to enterprise in the future? Kind of maybe a two-part question. I'm curious, just from both of your perspectives, master agents, how do they play into the ecosystem from your perspective in the future when it comes in cyber? And then maybe specifically enterprise, how do you see, if there's any nuance of the enterprise there? And I'll start with you, Aaron. Any thoughts on master agents in general to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say it is a good question, right? I would say the short answer is yes, but I would say it's with caveats, right? So those big master agents, I mean, they're already leaning heavily into security, right? But how much they own the enterprise market depends on how fast they can shift from selling connectivity and cloud into being like a credible security advisor, sort of like what we're talking about with MSPs. So I don't see master agents becoming like the primary sellers of enterprise security, but I do see them owning at least like that first call advantage where they'll set the table, maybe bring in vendors and or MSSPs, grab a little margin from that, and then go from there. So that's sort of where I see it going.
Thanks, Aaron. Jabari,
Yeah, I
any
would agree
thoughts
with
on master
Aaron on
agents?
that. Yeah, I mean, more master agents, I think more as an aggregator, they probably, they will have kind of strategic agreements in place with some very large enterprises. So as an aggregator, but as far as like, thought leadership, they're probably bringing other partners of theirs or other folks underneath them to really help drive that conversation. So I still think MSPs and MSSPs are really kind of going to be how small, mid, and even some large enterprises really consume cyber technology going forward. But you can't, I mean, the master agents are always going to be there. So you got to work with them there as well.
Cool. Has going through master agents, just to kind of go a little bit deeper, has that been a part of either of your strategies to reach MSPs? Maybe not so much the enterprise side, but to reach MSPs. Any thoughts there? Any experience there?
I'll add in, I mean, for me, it was definitely something later in the cycle. Like, I think it's just kind of like as you kind of build a partner strategy and define a partner strategy as part of that. I mean, there's definitely, based on the technology that you're selling or your stack, your software and current partners, there's definitely kind of a priority of things that you want to do first, right? As you're building the program towards that's generally towards the end, at least where I've seen that is where you have some scale, some repeatability, some really good use cases. Now you're looking to kind of jump to that next scale and you're looking for hundreds, thousands, to bring on kind of at a time. And you're able to kind of do enablement and stuff like that all together. So it's kind of one 401 class versus kind of like a 101 type thing. At least is how I've used them in the past.
Very cool.
Yeah, I would agree. We are not there quite yet from a zero networks perspective, but to the points that just made, I mean, potentially something down the road, but right now we do not.
Got it. Yeah. Well, my experience has been on the MSP side. Obviously, I've worked with master agents, and so I've been on that side. And then one of the smaller cybersecurity companies I've worked with, we tried to apply to get on the platform, and they were graciously declined us just because we weren't large enough. We didn't have the partner channel developed. Yeah, there's a bunch of reasons, but so I think there's also there's probably can't even get a shot at it until you're hit a certain size and or maturity and all the other fun stuff. So very cool. Thanks for sharing and more on that. We have a couple minutes left here. I'm curious, we've covered a lot, but I'm curious, maybe internally talking about kind of measuring impact, getting alignment internally. I know in the partnership, my experience with partnerships is that getting internal buy-in is sometimes the hardest to make sure, the patience to develop partnerships. I always say there's like, people talk about sales cycles. People sometimes talk about marketing cycles. People never talk about partnership cycles as far as the length, the time it takes, the investment, et cetera. So I'm curious, how do you all either measure impact, get impact internally, get buy-in internally, and ensure that you can play the long game and build those relationships? Any thought? I'll start with you, Jabari, on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's two components of that, especially with MSPs, right? Because there's the quote unquote sell to that you're kind of starting with, where you're presenting your solution, kind of why it's going to fit. Is it going to augment, replace something like that that's in their stack? And there's definitely going through POVs and validation, things like that you have to go through. And that's just the first step, right? Then the next step is then how do you build a whole program around selling through, right? And what's going to be needed. And so as far as building like internal buy-in, I mean, you just have to kind of tell the folks internally kind of what journey this is going to be, and that there's kind of two pieces to this and kind of where you're going to need help from the internal stakeholders. There is a sales cycle. These are not short, right? Because people don't change their tech stacks too often inside of their systems. And so just also having them understand how long these cycles are going to take, but kind of what the opportunity and the revenue is, on the back end. And that's really kind of the measurement that's coming on the back end is, whether that's deal registrations or net new people that they add into the pipeline, onto their program, because they're typically multi-tenancy on top of multi-tenancy systems that are in there. So tracking it with deal registration, understanding what the pipeline is, because every customer that they bring on is a certain amount of revenue to us. And at the end of the day, what is that revenue going to hit the books? So whether or not you prepay and they're buying licenses and they're burning those down, or there's some sort of rev share, or you're kind of going along with that, really, giving strong visibility into when that revenue is actually going to hit the books. And then kind of what are those clear steps that are going to happen, before that. And even from partners, you can have them and MSP partners provide, your pipeline, their forecasts of when they expect that, and then how that's kind of trickle downstream to us. So it's really important that you're just really close with the partner, right? And just say, hey, this is why we're locking arms. We're going to be in this for a long time. Here's what we're going to do on the front end. But the sell through is really important in really giving visibility across the teams for that. But it's a bit of a challenge. But the way I describe it to a lot of folks internally is by leveraging MSPs, it allows you to sell while you sleep. Everything else that we do, whether that's POG or sales or whatever, you have to be awake to do. MSPs allow you to sell while you sleep. They're selling on your behalf. They're building your solutions and stuff like that. And so it's yet another leg of the stool that if we can get this right, it becomes the fastest, biggest, and they also become your biggest customers because they're just buying in bulk on behalf of other people and more than that. And so just think of these as sales cycles as soon to be your biggest customers.
I love that. I love that. It's like passive GTM or like passive revenue, right? Not entirely, but I'm sure it kind of has that snowball effect. And like you said, at the very beginning, scale, right? Aaron, in closing, any thoughts you have?
Yeah, I love what was just said about the benefit of the channel, the benefit of MSPs, right? Because we actually use the same verbiage in internally as well when we're talking to our direct sales reps that don't work with MSPs, as much as those in the channel. And we said the same thing. Hey, you're going to make money while you're sleeping, right? And so that's funny that you just said that too. Yeah, selling internally is definitely a challenge, right? When you have like an enterprise grade solution, and now every sort of deal size is super large, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions. And now we're selling to the SMB market. That can be pretty enlightening for people when those deal sizes drop dramatically, right? And if you get a $1,000 deal, it's like, whoa, that's massive. Depending on what your price point is and stuff. So that is a challenge. One thing that I'll highlight from like a KPI perspective, as far as like what do we look at, what to measure if you're sort of building a program like this. I mean, the obvious ones are revenue, how many partners do you have, how many customers you have, things like that. The thing that I watch most closely is the customer count per partner. So how many customers does every partner have? Like what's our average, right? So, we talked about the challenges of staying top of mind before, and tracking customer counts going to tell you more than just numbers. It sort of shows you where your partnership really stands with that partner, right? It's going to tell you how well do they understand your solution, how comfortable are they selling it, right? Where does it fit in their overall priorities? If they only have one customer, using your solution, you're probably not a big priority of theirs, right? And so it's a very simple metric, but it reveals a lot about adoption, enablement, and really what the long-term partner potential is there as well.
Super cool. I love it. Super great insights. Thank you both. I know we're a little bit over time here, so we'll wrap up. Thanks everyone in the audience for asking questions and joining us live. Thanks again, Jabari. Thanks again, Aaron. I really appreciate you both coming on. And learned a lot myself. I'm gonna be taking some notes. I actually might be following up with both of you with some additional thoughts and questions because some really great insights. So yeah, thanks again everyone for listening to the Security Revenue Live show. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.